Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. It's a big Friday for Dusty May and his team. Joining us to discuss a pivotal Big Ten game for Michigan is the radio play-by-play voice of the Wolverines, Brian Boesch. First, a few of my thoughts to get us going. After last year, it was fair to say most of us thought it would take some time for Dusty May to get Michigan competitive again. We were wrong, though. With 6 games left, we are in first place in the Big Ten and will be back in the big dance in March. It's been incredible and fun to watch. I think it's safe to say this group doesn't make it easy on our nerves, though. Their penchant for blowing double-digit leads and ending up in nail-biters has been a constant all season. They keep finding ways to win, though, and that's what matters most. Friday, Tom Izzo and his red-hot Spartans pay a visit to Crisler for a titanic matchup between two of the best teams in the Big Ten and all of college basketball. The environment should be electric. Joining us on our game day segment is the gentleman who will be calling the action on the radio side, the voice of our Wolverines, Brian Boesch. So stay with us. Joining us today is the radio play-by-play voice of our Wolverines, Brian Boesch. Brian, great to have you back with us again.
No, I'm glad to be here, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Well, big doings on Friday night as we hit the home stretch in college basketball. The Spartans visit Crisler Arena, and they are coming off an impressive win against Purdue on Tuesday, playing their best basketball of the season, aren't they, Ryan?
They are. I mean, they got off to that 9-0 start, Michigan State did, and I think some of it was schedule aided, but not all of it. They still got some good wins. And, credit Michigan State for bouncing back from a winless trip out west and then losing at home to Indiana. That one was a surprising one. I thought what they did at Illinois was maybe even more impressive than Purdue, even if Purdue's the better team, just because they were down seemingly dead to rights early in that game and ended up winning it big. So it's a fascinating battle because, when you're on a 6-game win streak like Michigan is, you assume that, maybe Michigan's playing its best ball of the year. I don't think that's the case. I don't even think it's all that particularly close. Where Michigan has done really good work is by closing well. They're closing better than they have all season long. And it's probably going to be another close one at Crisler on Friday. And that closing experience will probably be needed to be leaned on again.
Yeah, we're sort of getting used to these close games, aren't we?
Used to might be strong. But, hey, they learned from the scars of earlier in the year. You think back to Arkansas and Wake Forest, and for me, the biggest gut punch of them all was Oklahoma, just how quickly that transpired. But for them to now have 7 straight wins in games decided by 4 points or less, it's a 180 compared to what we saw earlier in the year when the question was, can this team win any close games?
Well, Brian, let's talk about some of the key aspects of this matchup on Friday, if we could. The Spartans are elite defensively, very good, and on the boards, no doubt about it. Typical Izzo team on the boards. Michigan needs to match them in that department, don't they?
They do, and they're certainly capable of it, but it will require better defensive rebounding than we've seen a lot this year. Michigan State's ability to crash the glass is impressive. The Jackson Kohler jump he's made this season in several facets has been impressive to watch. Their guards do a pretty good job. That's something that Dusty May wants his guards to do, is rebound the basketball. I think that Michigan State does it at a pretty high level. Really, the entirety of Michigan State, not just in this category, but throughout the entirety of the roster and their stats, it blows you away just how solid they are, how balanced they are. And to your point, a lot of times you say with a long-term head coach like Michigan State has with Tom Izzo, oh, you just assume they're going to do this, 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 and this. Sometimes that's not necessarily true. You just kind of assume it is. But the core pillars of what a Tom Izzo-led Michigan State team has done to have success, this team possesses, even if the star power isn't necessarily as high as we've seen at times for Michigan State in the past.
Well, the Spartans push the ball off makes or misses extremely well when you watch them. That's what jumps out to me. Michigan transition defense has got to be better in this matchup, doesn't it?
It does. And Kyle Church, who's on the scout for this one, Michigan assistant, he had some really interesting quotes about that, saying that obviously he said they're elite in transition, but what he said was you just can't replicate it, and that's in preparation. And I mean, you just watch how fast this Michigan State team wants to push the tempo. And I think you couple that with the fact that, there's seemingly an infinite number of combinations that Tom Izzo can throw out there. So it's not only being able to excel in transition defense, but it's also then you need to be able to be buttoned up enough personnel-wise to be ready if it does pivot to a half court. If you do succeed on slowing them down and preventing a shot and a good look in transition, now you need to set your defense in a half court where you could have, again, any of 10 guys out there who play 15 or more minutes, any of 10 guys out there who score 5 or more points. The rebounding's pretty balanced. They have a few guys who are the assist players, certainly, the distributors here. That twofold concern, stopping him in transition and then still being buttoned up in the half court, that makes it for, I'm sure, a pretty stressful few days for the Michigan staff.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this edition of the Spartans is they are not a good team from beyond the arc, but a very good close-range team, 2-point shooting team, and darn good in the paint. So team and help defense, as you mentioned, has to be really the point of emphasis, doesn't it?
100%. Yeah, almost every player on Michigan State, you are okay with them shooting threes. You don't want to give them infinite wide open looks by any stretch of the imagination, but you're willing to surrender it. Now, think back to Sunday against Ohio State. Going into that game, I know I would have been totally fine if Devin Royal took a handful of threes, but then he made them.
Yeah.
So, you have to kind of combat that. Inevitably, there might be a random Spartan who isn't shooting very well from three who does it, right? I mean, Xavier Booker, he's a good player. He's shooting 22% from deep. He's not much of a three-point threat this year. Frankie Fiddler sub 20%. Jaden Akins is 29%. So, it's not going to be a focal point, but you can't just lay off on everybody. So I do think it's an interesting test of the whole concept of, hey, role players have a tougher time of playing on the road in the Big Ten than they do at home. And hopefully that bears out for Michigan on Friday night, because it would definitely benefit Michigan if they could, hold off Michigan State from having the Jackson Kohler out of nowhere 3-point barrage like he had in Champaign last weekend.
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, this Spartan team they're deep and they're talented, but unlike a lot of Izzo teams, maybe most of Izzo's teams over this long career, they really don't have a guy or a couple of guys for Michigan to have to defend, do they? It's all 5 on the floor.
Yeah, I think obviously, Jaden Akins is a really solid player. He's a good scorer. He's capable of shooting from three, even if it hasn't gone down. Yeah, I think the guy that I'm most fascinated about seeing in person is what we've seen from Jace Richardson, the freshman.
Yeah.
His last 4 games he started, and he's averaged 16 a game. And one game was really big in that mark, but he still scored double figures in all 4 of them. And, as you look and see where Izzo teams, where past Michigan teams have been good, it's having that surge down the stretch. So Richardson is a guy I'm really fascinated by. Will he continue to rise to the occasion? The other thing you have to keep in mind offensively is the one thing you can't do outside of transition struggles and a failure to rebound the basketball, you can't send these guys to the free throw line. That's the one area where, and it makes sense intuitively, right? If you have a bunch of role players, oftentimes role players are pretty good at taking advantage of scoring opportunities when they get them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Michigan State's 80% from the line. So you can't give Michigan State free opportunities. It'll be interesting. I think there'll be a lot of recalibration on both benches based on how this game is officiated. Because if it's officiated a little bit tighter to the vest, then that opens up some, I think it definitely benefits Michigan State because they play 10 guys, pretty fluid minutes, nobody more than 26 and a half, whereas Michigan obviously has to rely on the 2 bigs, and Michigan's not as good at free throw shooting. And if they allow it to be as physical as these games have tended to be in the past, that probably benefits Michigan from a free throw standpoint, but that requires Michigan to be the more physical team, which we saw a month ago at Purdue, kind of the culmination of a stretch where teams knew they could bully Michigan a little bit, and they've gotten better in that category. But here's one of the many Big Ten litmus tests in terms of physicality. Michigan State's always at or near the top of that physicality list.
Well, you just mentioned it with Friday's game. We know it is going to be physical, and the how the referees call the game will change that degree of physicality. The Spartans have been rugged all year. That's Izzo ball, but Michigan, at least as you mentioned, early in Big Ten play, got pushed around a bit. Are you seeing a change in the mentality and the physicality of this team as a group?
I am, and I don't think Michigan is the most physical team in the Big Ten. You don't have to be. That's fine. Michigan has some unique finesse player. I don't want Danny Wolf to only try to be physical, right? He's too multifaceted. He's too dynamic to try to just be a banger inside and stay within 10 feet of the basket. Vlad Golden certainly has that ability, and he showcased it. I think where I've seen more physicality and uptick there, look at what Roddy Gale Jr. has done as of late. Would I like to see him get the three-point shot going? Of course, that'd be big for this team. But Roddy has taken it to heart to say, hey, I know what this league's about. I know I can get to the basket, cause problems, draw fouls, get to the free throw line, maybe get some and ones. That's a big deal. Trey Donaldson has been ready and willing to do that. He struggled a little bit against Ohio State, but we've seen his ceiling case be really, really good. And Reuben Jones, I mean, Reuben is a smooth, tough guy, right? It's all kind of in motion, in the flow of things, but he's got that in him, that physicality in him, that I think really will benefit Michigan in this game, to where he doesn't have to score 15 points. Reuben Jones would be a guy that he might be the player that most fits on what Michigan State has done, right? In terms of don't need to play a ton of minutes. He's around 20 minutes a game, doesn't need to score or shoot a lot, but he can play defense. He can run. He can make some plays happen on the ball or away from the ball. I think his skill set's going to be really important on Friday night.
Well, this is Dusty May's first taste of this intense in-state rivalry. I mean, he went to Indiana. He's a Big Ten guy, so he has an idea, but it will be different on Friday night. Both teams are really good with a lot on the line in this game. It really doesn't get much better than this, does it?
No, and when it comes to Dusty, I think he's very good about, not making any sort of big headlines. He is willing to, get into the weeds within press conferences and interviews about, what his thought process is after the fact. He's willing to reflect on it. And I thought the way he explained where Michigan was leading from Ohio State to Michigan State, he joked that he almost felt bad that he transitioned so quickly into thinking about the Spartans. But that isn't a disrespect to Ohio State or a nod to the rivalry of Michigan State. The reality is that Michigan has been playing quote-unquote rivalry games for the last 3-4 weeks. Why? Because they've been at or near the top of the Big Ten. They're the team that people are chasing in this league. They're in first place right now. So everybody's looking up at them. Now, that does not mean that a game against, Purdue or Northwestern or whoever in the past is equal to Michigan State. It does not, and I don't think anybody in that program thinks that way. But the way to prepare for a game like this that in a vacuum has oomph to it. Even last year, the game in East Lansing was never really competitive, but the game at Crisler had some oomph to it. It probably had the most big game feel of any game down the stretch for Michigan when the Wolverines were playing out the string. So when you have those games that in a vacuum are relevant, you harken back on games that you've played that have been relevant so far this season. And Michigan has played so many close games. They have been at or near the top of the Big Ten standings almost the entire way. So they've gotten a strong feeling, a strong taste of what it's like. It does not replicate it, and there will be guys who will have to learn on the fly what this game means, how it feels, right? How it sounds in the moment. But when you are sitting there atop the Big Ten, 12-2 in the league, and everybody's looking up at you, including Michigan State, with the chance to leapfrog them, they've experienced some of that fire breathing down their neck. Now it just turned up to 10.
And for all of those reasons, it is going to be a rocking environment at Crisler Friday. It's going to be fun, isn't it?
Oh, can't wait. This is why we all watch sports. This is why we all follow these teams. This is why we digest the content that we listen to, read, watch, all of it. And the fact that, Michigan is in the midst right now of a potential worst to first season is remarkable. I mean, I think it's so great for this rivalry and for this state within the context of basketball that we are experiencing two really special stories. The story of Tom Izzo becoming the Big Ten's all-time winningest coach in terms of league wins, surpassing Bob Knight, and having Michigan take its rightful place back as a contender in the Big Ten and doing it in the most improbable of ways. First-year head coach, first time going through the Big Ten as a head coach, and going from 3-17 to 12-2. These are two of the best stories in college basketball. They've gotten to a point where now they're two of the best teams in college basketball in one of the best leagues in college basketball. This is phenomenal. This is awesome. This is why we watch and follow sports.
Well, whatever happens on Friday, and man, would it be sweet to get the Spartans at home, because we know where the regular season ends. But it is going to be a brutal stretch closing out. Rutgers and Illinois next week. Got to get these home wins, don't we, Brian?
Totally. I think it was John Beilein saying on an interview he thought that 4-2 would be an outright Big Ten championship. Maybe, but boy, it's not easy. It's been remarkable seeing what Michigan State has done, what Wisconsin is doing to surge. Purdue still kind of hanging out there, though I think they might be a little bit too far into the pack to be able to get maybe a full league title. Maybe they could try to, 2 or 3-way tie break a share somehow, some way. But yeah, I mean, what's so interesting about this stretch is that Friday starts a run of 5 games in 13 days where Michigan goes game, 2 days, game, 2 days, game, all the way until the Maryland game at home on March 5th, the home finale. Then they get one extra day before the trip up to East Lansing. So, this is a grueling stretch. The benefit is that they get 4 of these 5 at home. And that's why the great work that Michigan did away from home, being 6-2 in the league on the road side of things to this juncture. I mean, gosh, of all the things that we would have gladly accepted at the start of the year, I would have probably chuckled and said 6-2 on the road in the Big Ten to start. Come on, now let's be realistic here.
Yeah.
Here they are with, and considering that they've won at Wisconsin. Wisconsin's one of the hottest teams in college basketball. They've won at Indiana, which is always tough. They've won at Ohio State. So a lot to really appreciate and like. They won by 19 at UCLA. I mean, it's been a lot of fun. Yeah, it's one of those where you feel like you've got some room, you get a win, and then you get to that next game and it has some extra urgency to it. But no game feels more urgent than Michigan State. And the goal is, hey, maybe they can do such great work between now and that trip up to East Lansing that maybe that's just for Michigan bragging rights come March the 9th. But I have a feeling that game's going to have big-time implications, too.
Oh, man. Yeah, just peeking ahead to that final week of the regular season, we have Maryland, and, I almost hate to say a team we should beat, but we should beat them, but you never know. And then you have the season finale in East Lansing. Can you imagine if that game against the Spartans is for all the marbles in the Big Ten, Brian, how insane that environment will be?
We experienced it in 2019, and obviously it didn't go Michigan's way. But you know what? This team has had an incredible ability not just to win close games, but to find a way on the road. Right now when you're up and you got a home game against that team, you want a little bit more. But let's face it, at the start of the year, if you told us you're going to get a chip in a chair in your finale in East Lansing, we'd all have taken it. Maybe we're going to be a little greedy and want to try to avoid that and lock up the outright title by then. But for now, just trying to soak this up as much as possible, because there has not been a run like this in a long, long time in college basketball, 6 straight wins by 4 or less. So let's soak it up. And I think everybody would be appreciative of maybe a little bit more lopsided win than 4 if they could get it on Friday night. That would be a little bit less stressful, even if it's going to be nail biting the whole way.
Amen. Coach B always said championships are won in late February and early March when you should be playing your best ball. And you've been courtside, you've been around it from day one. Is Michigan at its best right now, or do you think there is still another level that they can achieve?
I'll tell you, Mike, I think there's several levels that they can achieve just because the shots haven't gone down. The biggest trend I'll share with you, something I dug into a little bit when it comes to three-point shooting. In Michigan's last 8 games, they're shooting 30.6% from three. The previous 6, which included that barrage at USC and UCLA, and there were a couple of non-conference games in there. But the previous 6 games, Michigan was at 46.3%. Now, 46% is not, that's not to me, a long-term true potential for any team in the Big Ten when you're playing in the league. But it can be a lot closer to 46% than 30%. So to me, that's where the upside leads. Michigan has been able to have the vast majority of its shots come on dunks, layups, or threes, which has been Dusty May's goal ever since he was a head coach at FAU, win the shot quality battle. But Michigan hasn't hit a lot of those shots from three. If they start getting anywhere close to 46%, just meet in the middle, right? 38% from three. That's an extra 3 made threes a game. That is a massive, massive difference. So to me, I still think there's a couple of extra levels there. And the fact that, I'm a believer in regression. It's really difficult to win 6 straight games by 4 or less. Is Michigan due for a loss? Of course. Is Michigan also due for a double-digit win where all the shots that they should make go down? Yes. Hopefully the latter of those two show up on Friday night versus the former. There's regression both ways. And I think that the fact that Michigan's been able to win 6 in a row like this is a sign that they can find unique ways to win, which, let's face it, in March, you got to get creative. You look back to some of those great runs that Michigan has made to the Final Four, to the national championship game. 2018, they blew out Texas A&M in the Sweet 16, one game after being saved by the Jordan Poole heave against Houston. Then the next game, Elite Eight, they had to grind out a game that they didn't get to 60 points against Florida State. Think back to 2013, the Trey Burke game. Looked like the season was over. They go to overtime, beat Kansas. Then they throttle Florida to get to the Final Four. So you have to be creative. You have to ebb and flow based on how the games go. And this team is capable of doing it, even if we haven't seen one of those blowouts in a while.
Well, final question before we let you get away, Brian. I think we all agree when it comes to this Michigan team, when the season started, no one saw this kind of year coming. And all along the way, I keep thinking, man, what an incredible job Dusty May has done. I mean, it is just remarkable, isn't it?
He has changed the mindset, the approach, the efficiency of this program in a remarkable way. It's been fascinating to watch in close, from afar, as games go on, in the aftermath of games, in the lead up to games. I just think back to how confident he was willing to be in press conferences, in interviews, as he started to build this roster. I really thought, Mike, that, when Dusty was announced as the head coach, I said, boy, that's, after the previous season, you really wondered when Michigan could get back to relevance. And why Dusty was so intriguing to me in the immediate was, maybe you can bring in 3 or 4 FAU players and try to build FAU North. And then he only gets 1, technically 2 with LJ Kaysen, who was a commit, but 1 proven player in Vlad Golden. Elijah Martin goes elsewhere. John L. Davis goes elsewhere. A few other guys go to different places. And yet, despite that seemingly, go straight to go and collect $200 type thing, he only gets 1 of those guys, yet he still builds a roster that is contending for a Big Ten championship. So that right there shows you he has some core principles, shot quality and tempo and all of that. But he also can kind of be malleable in roster building, in circumstances, year to year, game to game, player to player. It's been special to watch. And, he's, to me, the Big Ten Coach of the Year. He's a National Coach of the Year candidate, if not favorite. And Michigan fans are really fortunate to have him a part of the program.
So I look forward to turning down the TV sound and turning you and Terry on for your call from courtside. It's going to be a blast. With us today has been the radio play-by-play voice of Michigan basketball, Brian Boesch, who does such a great job. So, Brian, thanks for carving out some time for us today, and we look forward to another visit soon.
Always happy to do it, Mike. Thanks for all your support, and go Blue.
On Quick Hits today, thanks again to Brian Boesch for being with us. We hope to have him back in the coming weeks as we get closer to the Big Ten and NCAA tournaments. We'll keep it short to close the show because we want to get this episode live ahead of the big game with the Spartans on Friday. In the coming weeks, we'll keep the focus on basketball, but spring sports are in full swing, and football will be back front and center soon when spring practice starts. So as always, there is plenty to talk about. Make sure you join us again next week. A reminder to tell your Wolverine friends and family about the show and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. It would also help if you leave a comment or rate us wherever you get your podcasts from. That does it for now. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go Blue.
Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!